Welcome to the session. My name is James, and I'm going to be navigating us through the next half an hour or so. So we're on this session to have a chat about looking after yourself during lockdown 3.0. What a big, wide-ranging subject that is, and what a very subjective subject that is. So let me just position it. First of all, who am I to tell people how to look after themselves? Well, to be honest with you, I'm not. I'm an ordinary bloke who has just got a very, very deep interest in mental health and well-being, and I'm on a journey in trying to understand more. As part of my journey through the subject, I'm a registered mental health first aid instructor. I'm also a national trainer for the charity Mind, and I'm a member of the Royal Society for Public Health. I have got no formal qualifications in any way. Like I say, I'm a regular person. We're on a journey with a deep-rooted interest and a bit of experience. The picture of me, believe it or not, was what I looked like 3 months ago before I just gave up with lockdown and decided to try the lockdown beard look. So that's not an old picture, it's quite recent. So you're not seeing double. Okay, so all I'm really going to do is just share some insights, some thoughts that I've acquired on my journey over the last 12 months or so, interacting with folk from various businesses across numerous sectors, as we've, if you like, tried to navigate our way through the impact of the pandemic. And what I'm going to share isn't gospel, isn't a directive. They're just some common thoughts and insights that I've accumulated over the space of the last 12 months, with some other references and nods to my time as a mental health first aid instructor for the last 5 years. So, just to give us a bit of context and background, or current reality as I call it. Now, what you can see on the screen, and as I talk through things, in no way am I taking a blanket approach. One size does not fit all. And right now, the reality that we're all experiencing, we are interpreting and responding to events in our own particular way. We're not all in the same boat. And we are trying to navigate our way through a storm that's affecting all of us. Some of the most common insights that I've certainly been picking up over the last few months, a lot of noise about lockdown 3 being more arduous a lot more quickly for folk and having a significant impact on folk quite quickly as we came out of Christmas. We are still living in times that are very unpredictable, and whether it's on a professional or a personal front, that unpredictability can feel quite unrelenting. Demands and expectations on us, again, professionally and personally, can change by the hour. And we are being impacted by external factors as never before. Certainly, sitting in front of our TVs whenever the Prime Minister wants to make an announcement tends to get us all paying a bit of attention in terms of what's he going to say and how's it going to impact on me tomorrow. In the world of work, there seems to be a dichotomy appearing between those folk who remain in employment and feel a little bit guilty about that versus the backdrop of a tremendous amount of job insecurity in many sectors, and a lot of people are losing their jobs. And when we wrap that up with many folk are trying to work and, if you like, fulfill their obligations in life, whether it's as a parent, a family member, a carer, in the same environment, usually the environment in which we live in, it tends to be making the sense of being cut off and isolated. Certainly those of us that are used to interpersonal contact, but that sense of isolation can feel quite acute for some, as can a sense of being distant and remote. The majority of us tends to be very outward looking in the way we consider other people. So the majority of us tends to find ourselves naturally as a result of programming or our occupation or our own makeup, tend to look out for others without too much consideration for ourselves. And right now, many folk are not too good at giving themselves permission to acknowledge how they're feeling, usually because of the busyness of what we're trying to do day to day. And it can be really hard for folk to consider focusing on what can I control when so much is going on around us and we are being impacted by so many other aspects of life and events. So all I'm going to do for the next few minutes is just share five little insights that are quite current right now, and being spoken about right now across multiple sectors, organizations, platforms. Ultimately, they may resonate with you, or one or two resonate with you, but they're not here as a best practice. I'm not sharing them as they're the best things to do. It's more about just some, I don't know, insights, thought provokers, maybe some prompts for some personal reflection. And if that's what you get out of them, that's fantastic. So the first one I just want to share with you is this one. One of the most common questions I get when I am delivering training, either in mental health first aid or in other aspects of the work I do, particularly around meaningful conversations and supportive conversations with others. One of the most common questions I get is, what do I do if a person says I'm fine? And I'm fine seems to be quite a stock response for many of us. It's almost like we're not giving ourselves permission to share, talk, or communicate. And yeah, through the busyness of the reality that we're living through, time may be a big factor. But you know, many of us are quite reluctant to talk or share, possibly because we feel that we're being a burden on someone else. Technology is an enabler as well as a ball and chain around our necks. Technology as a ball and chain can be unreliable, it cannot work. Equally, it can be the thing that drives volumes of work as well, and right now is leading a lot of people to feel that they can't switch off. It always needs to be switched on. But technology, through these times of enforced isolation, is also an enabler. So, you know, we're using technology to interact like never before. You know, there are still aspects of our lives where we can interact with other people in a intrapersonal way. But the one thing that you know, I've learned an awful lot about through my time as a mental health first aid instructor is, first of all, acknowledging how we're feeling when we're having a tough time, and then feeling safe to be able to share it with somebody, especially someone who has got a genuine and authentic consideration for us. And being able to share is actually the first step in being able to move forward. And everything I do in the training I deliver centers around creating that environment and folk understanding the difference between being genuine and authentic versus going through the motions. But I'm fine seems to be a stock answer. So if you like, the one thing that I would share is, you know what, next time somebody genuinely wants to reach out to you, or somebody genuinely just asks you that question, how are you doing? Think twice before you say I'm fine. It's okay to share. It's okay to talk. We're just not used to it, but we're living through times that no one's ever experienced before. Moving on and staying a little bit with the technology thing, social media. Now, I'm not here to demonize social media, far from it. Social media, in many ways, for many folk, is an essential part of feeling connected, especially over time, distance, and through isolation. But, you know, a bit like anything in life, you can sometimes have too much of something when it starts to become unhelpful. And social media has absolutely its benefits, but it also can be unhelpful too. And when I'm talking about social media, I'm not just talking about your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your Snapchats. I'm talking about the professional platforms as well, such as LinkedIn, or the semi-professional platform where Twitter seems to have become a quasi-social and professional platform for folk. The more we interpret what's going on in the world through social media, the more we're building up a reference point or a window on our perceived reality. And the thing over the last year or so with certain social media platforms, they do tend to generate a sense in many people of, I need to be like that, or we question ourselves because folk post, I don't know, stories or aspects of what they're up to, whether that's on a social or professional level, and it can sometimes lead us to doubt ourselves. It can sometimes lead us to judge ourselves, and all I would say is sometimes everything that we see on social media is not necessarily reality. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, most people will post their "this is what's great" stories. Look at me, this is what I'm good at stories. Slowly, certainly since the start of lockdown 3, folk are giving themselves permission to be honest on social media and say, I'm not having a great time, or I just need to step away from LinkedIn or Twitter for a while. But just again, just ask yourself, what's the benefit? What's the purpose? How is this helping me? How is it enhancing me? And don't be afraid to sometimes give yourself a break from it. The one thing I would say is, if you judge yourself on how you're coping or performing based on what you read on social media, you're being unfair to yourself and unhelpful to yourself. The only person that's qualified to benchmark how you're doing is you. So give yourself a bit of downtime, and I'm not saying take a complete break from it, but how you use it, how frequently, and at what times of day or night you use it. The other thing I would say, it's related but not the same, is the news. It can be really unhelpful if we get too immersed in watching too much news. All broadcasters have got a slightly different slant on things, and we are shaped and informed and make decisions by what we pick up by the media. But just think about, how do you manage and, if you like, limit the time you spend watching the news? Because the news, if you watch it 24/7, which I've put myself through to understand this, none of it is good most of the time, and sometimes it can be quite confusing. So just think about things like how much news you absorb on top of your social media absorption. The next point, moving on, is looking after ourselves physically. Now, many folk that I work with and I come into contact with tends to immediately default to looking after yourself physically means being active, exercise, and we're very restricted on that side of things. Absolutely, but it's never just been about how active you are. Going for a walk, movement of any kind is helpful. What we eat, what we drink, how we hydrate ourselves, nutrition, particularly if we're quite static in not moving around much, helpful. Sleep, how we rest, how we recover. And I know it can all be easier said than done, because for many of us, aspects of this have been highly disrupted, but it's important to consider it. It's important to consider, how can I look after my physical well-being even when I'm quite static and not moving around an awful lot, because ultimately the way we feel physically has a direct impact on our mental health and well-being as well. And if we're starting to feel not great about ourselves physically, or we feel we've let ourselves go in some way, that's going to have an unhelpful impact in our overall sense of how we think and feel about ourselves. So just consider, how do I, or how can I look after myself? The one thing I would say about sleep is trying to force yourself to sleep when you're not tired can sometimes make things worse. So just think about patterns of activity that can help you around rest and recover. Okay. Next one is something that personally I spend quite a lot of time talking to folk in their business organisations about. In your line of work, if you have access to professional supports as part of an overall benefits package, use it. If you have access to things like an employee wellbeing program, an employee assistance program of some description, occupational health, avail yourself of the benefit, because that's what they are, a free benefit. And if they are offered to you by your employer, please don't think that they're connected to your employer directly in any way, and therefore there's a lack of confidentiality. All employee assistance programs are usually provided by an external organisation, and centre around providing direct access wellbeing support, whether it's in the form of it's usually single point of access for a telephone number, and it gives direct access to professional help and support at the end of the phone initially, but it can also lead to face-to-face or online counselling and support. Covers all aspects of life, not just mental health or physical health, but things like legal matters, financial matters, taxation, financial problems, family disputes, citizens advice type matters, consumer rights type matters. And there's a myth that circulates around EAPs that like I said, they're designed to catch folk out, or sometimes folk just really don't understand what they can do for them or that they exist. So what I would say is, if you have anything like a professional support benefit in place around your overall well-being, be curious about it. Ask the question of your employer if you're not sure. They're free to use. They're 100% confidential, and they can make the difference. No one should ever be wary, suspicious, or not knowing of benefits like this that exist, because in the world of work, a benefit is an entitlement. And right now, if it's there, use it. Certainly be curious about it, because you have access to it as a result of your employment status. And then finally, and again, this many folk can think, well, this is easier said than done, but we're really good at putting pressure on ourselves. We're really good at being the last to notice in ourselves when we may be having a tough time or struggling in some way. And it's not easy trying to take pressure off of ourselves or putting additional pressure on. But at the end of the day, the only way that we can look after ourselves is by consciously, one, recognizing when we need to do it, and two, by the choices that we make. No one else is going to do it for us. The people that know us best are us, ourselves. Within employment contracts, within life itself, there's nothing to say that we're not allowed to give ourselves some time to ourselves. We are allowed to rest and recover, and ultimately we sometimes have to step back and think, anything that's not working, things that are broken, it's not our sole responsibility, even though we feel like it is. At the bottom of the quote there that I found just before Christmas, that just really resonated with me on a number of different levels. That bottom statement there, remember to take time for you, time to replenish. It is so important. Just thinking about yourself, thinking about what can I do for me? Yeah. Connecting with things that help me to relax, connecting with things that help me decompress, give me a sense of purpose, help me to move forward. How many of us have maybe got a hobby that we've let slip, doing something we enjoy? Yes, the current restrictions have impaired and limited how we can express ourselves and do things that we enjoy, but equally, giving ourselves a little bit of time to find something that gives us a sense of connection, purpose, to enjoyment, rest and recovery. Again, no one's going to do it for us. We need to be fair on ourselves and give ourselves the scale, the scope and the time to do it for ourselves. So a couple of pointers for folk around just, I don't know, appeasing further curiosity. just sharing with you on the screen now something called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. It was initially created in 2008 by something called the New Economic Foundation. So it's very much created through the mindset of the workplace. But 5 key principles there. I'm not going to regurgitate what you can see on the screen, but you'll see there's a live link at the bottom, which takes you to the Mind website that gives you a little bit more detail. But you can see there the 5 principles around the 5 ways to wellbeing, centered around a number of aspects that I've been speaking about just through a different context, because obviously this existed prior to the pandemic. So you can see their connection about being able to talk, listen, being there, being in the moment, feeling connected to someone, feeling connected to a purpose, being active or movement, taking notice, thinking about the simple things that we enjoy and giving ourselves time to do it. Never too late to learn about ourselves. That's certainly the context I would position it in, as opposed to formal learning, and being able to give time, being altruistic, whether that's your time, your words, your ears, your presence. You're giving your time to this today, so that's a great start. That's a good moment. So 5 ways to wellbeing, very universally used and adopted across organisations like mine, Time to Talk, MHFA England, for example. I've also popped into the pack for you the link to a website called Action for Happiness, who I first came across on my journey as a mental health first aid instructor, and who promote this thing called the 10 Keys to Happier Living. Action for Happiness produce a monthly calendar with a theme, which can be accessed online. But what I would say around the 10 keys, there are some similarities around the 5 ways, but go into a little bit more detail. And again, what I would say just poses the question to ask ourselves. What do we do for ourselves when, are we coping? Are we well? Are we healthy? Are we happy? What can we do to enable ourselves? What environment can we create for ourselves? And you can see there that the 10 keys, when you take the first letter of each key, gives you the acronym Great Dream. The other thing that I would say, I don't have a visual to share with you, but I would just make reference to the Qube guide to mental health support and guidance. On page 13, within that document, there are, within the list of supports, there's a little chunk, a little section there around self-helps and self-supports. And there's just some references and addresses to direct access to some apps and some technological interventions that are very good, very helpful, very tried and tested as well. So I would just give a nod towards the Qube guide as well that you've all received. So I know I've gone through that quite quickly, and your take out of it will be yours. Like I say, I'm not here to try and tell anybody what they should or shouldn't be doing. It's more around points of consideration. The one thing I would say, just to sort of round off, is this. Self-care, or looking after yourself, often gets misinterpreted by folk as being a little bit selfish or self-centered. Not true. Sometimes self-care is a term. Some folk can misinterpret it as a bit of a buzzword, and again, that's not true. The way I like to position considering oneself and looking after oneself is just according oneself a little bit of self-respect. We tend to find we give other people an awful lot of respect, and we're there for others a lot of the time. Sometimes we just need to do the same for ourselves, but it's hard. And it's not straightforward, and it's not formulaic. But look after yourselves, think about yourselves. It's all about being able to feel comfortable giving ourselves a little bit of time for ourselves. And at 1:36, that's pretty much me done. So
that's great. Thank you very much, James. We have just had a couple of questions come through via the chat function and via email. One that came in anonymously is, I'm currently working from home and really struggling to switch off. I often find myself sat on my laptop in the evenings. Have you got any tips or advice on how people can switch off? I suppose working and relaxing in the same place can be quite a challenge, I suppose.
Working and living in the same place is very difficult. The first thing I would say is I think the term working from home is not helpful. I think it actually dilutes what we're trying to do. And the line between work and not work has become very blurred because many of us are finding ourselves working in the place we live. From my perspective, it's important to, one, establish some routines and also set some boundaries. So again, a lot of conversations I have at the moment center around give yourself a deadline when you're going to switch off the work side of things, switch off the work laptop and stick to it. Try to avoid, first of all, it's 8 o'clock. The kids are in bed, the house is quiet. I'll just go onto email for an hour and clear everything down. Just try to avoid it. Try and fill that hour with something else, something that you might have done before. I know there may be a battle around productivity and getting things done, but ultimately it's very easy to fall into a habit of, suddenly falling into your working pattern spans 14, 16 hours in a day. And very quickly we become very tired, very fatigued. And when that happens, it's a false prophecy, because that's when our decision making becomes impaired, our judgment becomes impaired, and our output becomes impaired. So routine is really important. Again, trying to find the time that we may have used to stay connected to work, try and find something else to fill that time. But equally, I can't say what that is. That will be an individual choice. But boundaries are really important. And the other thing that I would say is it's important to communicate upwards when it comes to the world of work. So, share boundaries with line managers, or discuss boundaries with line managers, set expectations. It can be difficult and it can be challenging, especially at the first time, but ultimately, that's a sign of self-respect. You're respecting your time, you're respecting your downtime, and in agreement with your line manager, you'll probably feel a little bit better about it too.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. We just got 2 others that have come through. One from Nikki in the chat function. So thanks, Nikki. Can you recommend, I think this relates back to the 5 key sort of points you mentioned, and one of them being give. And she's asked, can you recommend any good places to find volunteer roles in your area, relating back to that give element?
Yeah, so one consideration would be to get in touch with your local branch of Mind. So Mind is a national brand, if you like, but the way Mind are actually set up is on a very sort of regionalised and local basis. So each branch of Mind works in a slightly different way, but has quite an extensive network of connections to public health organisations, to third sector charities and so forth. So your local branch of Mind would be a good start point, and they're always happy to connect you to local public health authorities as well. So
amazing.
That would be a good start point. The one thing I would say is, depending where you are in the country, you will get regional variations, Nikki. So if you are a bit like me, you live in somewhere that maybe straddles, I live in Swindon, so I straddle Wiltshire, I straddle Gloucestershire, and I'm very close to Bristol. I've got access to sort of 3 branches of Mind sort of very quickly, and they're set up in different ways. So just be mindful of that as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a look at that as well. We have had another one pop in. I'm conscious of time, so if we don't get to anybody's questions within the time frame, we'll make sure that we follow it up after the session. But the next one is, I'm currently furloughed and struggling to keep struggling to keep myself occupied. So I spend the day overthinking anything and everything, leading to concern and worry and the future of my job.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to overcome this? So maybe overthinking, too much time on their hands.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I also just say with the furlough, and I don't know whether this is the case, but also is it people's not understanding about what you can do whilst you're on furlough, the boundaries. So actually, you are allowed to do training, you are allowed to work. It's all about basically whilst you're on furlough, the company that has furloughed you, that you're not doing anything that creates revenue for that company whilst you're on furlough. So there are things that you can do, and perhaps linking to what James was just talking about with volunteer work, but there are things that you can invest your time in whilst you're not working. Sorry, James, I just wanted to get that in.
I said all that without moving my lips. I think, no, thank you, Sally. A couple of really important points Sally makes there about, one, just understanding what furlough means, and there's still a little bit of mystery sometimes about what someone can or can't do during furlough. The thing for me around that, the question, which is a very good question, by the way, I think there's a couple of bits for me. One is about time and having time and how you spend it. And the second one's about communication and awareness. So from the time side of things, again, when you're on furlough, there are things you're allowed to do. So you are allowed to train, you are allowed to attend events where you learn. And I certainly have met many folk who are currently, in various stages of furlough, some that have been furloughed for months, others is quite recent, who come on training sessions because they want to invest their time wisely, maybe learn something new. Sometimes it might be to gain a certificate, gain wider awareness, but how you fill your time will be very helpful. And what I would say is just think about, being proactive, and again, doing something for you. So if we think about learning, there's plenty of free events, webinars, sessions that I just see a constant stream of events that are access through technology, but they count as CPD events. They are invariably free. There's plenty of opportunities to learn, absorb information and knowledge, for example, and all of that is absolutely fine. Similarly, being able to engage and communicate with your employer is still allowed. The one thing I would say is, and again, without wishing to sound like I'm trying to sort of stir anything up, but it is important that an employer communicates with an employee during the furlough process. And it's also important if at any stage as an employee you would seek clarity, or you just want to touch base with any developments, what's happening in the business, what's happening in the organisation, and ask for that time, and ask for that, that update. What I can't do is say how things are going to turn out, because nobody can. And right now, many businesses are still trying to navigate their way through a colossal amount of uncertainty, and it is a very worrying time. So I don't know, I wouldn't call it advice. I would probably just call it a couple of thoughts or suggestions. Think about how you use your time so that you're using it constructively. Take a look at what's out there that you may be able to do. So volunteering, attending events where you learn, acquire knowledge, which is all perfectly fine and allowed within the rules of furlough. And then the second one is communicate, and make that two-way between you and your employer.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Just got one final question. I'm very conscious of time, so sorry for overrunning slightly, but thank you to Mike for sharing this in the chat. Mike has said, I'm struggling to find support to cope with being autistic and dealing with all the changes and uncertainty. Do you know of any organisations that could help? So a bit of a referral request there, if you know of any.
Yeah, I'll take it offline and I'll send something into you, Holly, so that you can forward on to Mike. Mike, I'll send a couple of reference points, resources for you, and we'll see where it goes. But I'll do that via Holly. So, but thank you for coming in with that one.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And that's the end of the questions. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sally. Is that all done presentation wise, James? I don't want to cut you off. You all done? Perfect.
Now it's all done. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. As James said, we'll make sure that we get any resources that were referenced in the webinar sent across to you along with the recording. And hopefully we'll speak with you all soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye. Thank you, James. Thank you, Holly.